The Awakening of the Consciousness. Chapter 6. Techniques for Awakening. As we explained in the previous chapter, the consciousness which we already have free and which we are liberating through the inner work on ourselves so that it may be useful to us, has to be activated. That is to say, we have to use it, to exercise it. For it would be useless to have great percentages of free consciousness if we did not use it. Consciousness is liberated with the work of psychological death and is put into activity, is used with certain concrete techniques that will be described in this chapter. Key of Soul. To achieve the expression of our consciousness at any moment or in every moment, there is a great key which consists in the division of attention. If a person divides his attention at a certain moment into three parts: subject, object, and location, he can be conscious at that moment, not only of the external world, but also of his inner world and himself. Let us remember that consciousness is compared to a flashlight, which gives light wherever we focus it. If we simultaneously focus it outside and inside of ourselves, we can be conscious of what is happening in the external world and of what is happening in our internal world. And let us remember what we have said, that to be aware of something or to have consciousness of something is to realize. If we manage to divide our attention simultaneously into subject, object, and location, we can provoke the third state of consciousness called self-consciousness or self-remembering. What is the technique of Key of Soul? In this case, soul is an acrostic formed by the first letter of the three words: subject, object, location. These are the three words that the technique uses in order to shock the consciousness at a certain moment, and in this way we activate it through three questions that the person asks himself. First, subject: who am I? Second, object: what am I doing? Third, location: where am I? It is important to clarify that we do not ask ourselves these questions mentally, and that it is not necessary to give verbal answers with the mind. At that moment we ask the questions, we must simply bring into our interior the remembrance of certain things. The answer to the first question, who am I, would be the person. But what we want to provoke with that question is the intimate remembrance of ourselves from moment to moment, not forgetting ourselves before any representation, before any event, self-vigilant in every second, being in a state of alertness in relation to our thoughts, gestures, actions, emotions, habits, words, etc. We can affirm that the main objective of this first question is to activate the consciousness, if it happens to be asleep, in such a way that we do not forget ourselves, that we feel ourselves, that we feel our body, our person, our being, that we do not forget that we exist, that we are. Dear reader, if at this moment you ask yourself this question, who am I? Without answering anything to yourself mentally, you can feel yourself. You can remember that you exist, that you are. The answer to the second question, what am I doing? Would be the thing that we are doing at that moment, and the objective here is to not become identified, not with anything, with no circumstance, to observe without becoming identified, without forgetting ourselves. At no time are we going to give to ourselves a verbal answer with the mind. That is, if we apply the key of soul at this moment, in the first question we remember and feel ourselves, and in this second question we are not going to answer with the mind, I am reading a book. We simply become conscious of what we are doing without forgetting ourselves, and observing in detail all the objects or representations that reach the mind through the senses, from the outside and from the inside, in order not to become identified with things, not with anything, because if we fall into identification, then comes fascination and sleep, as we have already explained. The main objective of this second question is to place the consciousness here and now in order to experience the event that is being presented at every moment, avoiding identification and sleep. How often does it happen that we are doing something and at the same time thinking about things which have absolutely nothing to do with it? It may be that a person is walking down the street while thinking about his problems, his projects, his obligations, etc., forgetting himself and the external event. A person is having dinner at home and thinks about everything that happened to him that day at work, his chores, his problems, the things he has to resolve, resulting in forgetting himself and not remember that he is eating. He does it mechanically, totally asleep. Remember that where our mind is, there we are. Therefore, the second question gives us the possibility of bringing the consciousness to the event that is being experienced, and that way we can live the event consciously, without dreaming. The answer to the third question, where am I, would be to simply become aware of the place in which we are, to observe it, observe its details, recognize it, and ask ourselves, for example, what is this place? Why did I come to this place? If we are in our home, in our bedroom, we observe the details as if it were some new place, because if we do not do so, we become mechanical in regards to this place, believing that We already know it and therefore sleep psychologically. In short, the technique would be: subject, the person; object, what it is doing; location, where it is. The Master Samael, in giving this key to awaken, placed a lot of emphasis on the need to practice it in order to not forget ourselves, and to begin to live in a third state of consciousness. Years later, the Master Lakshmi, revealer of the jewels of the Yellow Dragon, gave us some variations of the technique of the Key of Soul, conserving the spirit of it, but specifying some details that allow us to go even deeper in our interior. In the unveiling of the 21st jewel of the Yellow Dragon, the Master explained: first question, subject, he who is thinking. Second question, object, what am I doing? Third question, location, my heart. The subject is the one who is here. Which subject is thinking when one is observing himself? Who is thinking? That is the individual we should be observing. Are we observing ourselves with the heart? Or are we observing ourselves with the mind? The object is that which the person is doing, and the location is the heart. A very interesting variation of this technique is that we try to practice the Key of Soul, always concentrated on the heart. This gives us the ability to gravitate in our heart, and when a person has that capacity, he changes his life completely. He changes his view of life, for he has placed himself in the center of the circle, in the center of radiation of life. As we begin to live in the heart, this center and also this chakra are activated and begin to awaken in the person a great number of faculties, a mystical, devotional sense, much peace and harmony that emanate from our real internal being, that properly has its epicenter of expression in the atom Gnosis, located in the left ventricle of the heart. Incredibly, the Master Samael says in the book Revolution of Bell the following: just as the sun has a central atomic nucleus, which is the atom Gnosis, which is the seat of Brahma in us, that atom is the first vital center that functions in the fetus and the last to stop living in our organism. This atom contains the mind, the life, the energy, and the will of man, and has an opalescent luminous aura which radiates and shines. And as the Gnostic instructor also says, if we observe our atom Gnosis internally, we would see it as a sun emanating from itself harmonious rays of golden light. It acts as a life-giving atomic energy plant, something very analogous to the sun, which illuminates us daily and gives life to our entire planetary system. When the person achieves through these techniques the remembrance of himself, he not only establishes within himself the third state of consciousness, self-consciousness, but also manages to stabilize the note sol, which will allow him to escape from the wheel of samsara through the revolution of the consciousness. The essence in the mineral kingdom vibrates with the note do, in the vegetable kingdom with the note re, in the animal kingdom with the note mi, and in the humanoid kingdom with the note fa. When the person manages to stabilize the note sol, he escapes from the wheel of evolution and involution through revolution, which is that which allows him to have a solar consciousness. The technique of alarm clocks. The technique of alarm clocks is known in esotericism as a series of contraptions that we can use to help us give a shock to the consciousness, and in that way provoke awakening at a given moment. Alarm clocks can be presented in a very diverse way and can have the most varied forms anyone can imagine. They depend on the creativity of the disciple and the master. Let us see some practical examples of what alarm clocks are. Some wristwatches have a function called time signal, which causes the alarm to emit 2 or 3 sounds every hour. You can activate this function, and each time the alarm sounds, at each hour precisely, remember that you have to be in self-remembering. Another alarm clock could be, for example, to make a poster of a considerable size and paste it on the wall of our bedroom, somewhere where we easily see it continuously, which says, "Are you awake?" Another example could be to place in our wallet, or purse in case of a woman, a card along with the money, which reminds us that we have to awaken, so that each time we open the wallet, we see it and are reminded of our work in this discipline. If we want to have results in our inner work, we have to start working with order, to be ordered in our house, to have our bedroom in perfect cleanliness and order, etc. But sometimes we can leave something out of place for some time on purpose within our order, so that each time we see it, we are reminded to be in self-remembering. Sometimes an object in an inappropriate place, causing us inconvenience when we move about in the house or at work, acts as an alarm clock, because it forces us to be awake so as to not stumble or bump onto it. Here in the monastery, we often recite prayers from the Masters of Wisdom, which we have in written form and read out loud. Sometimes we omit a word or something on purpose, in order to force ourselves to be awake when we reach that point and pronounce the word or phrase that has been omitted from the paper. For example, there is a sentence that ends with "so be it," but we do not have it on paper, so that there is an alarm clock there. As you can see, dear reader, Alarm clocks can be very many and of the most varied forms and categories, but there is a problem regarding them, and consists of the fact that after a certain chronological time of function, since the person gets used to them, they become mechanical and no longer give results. Because of that problem, alarm clocks are helpful and useful, but one has to be continually changing them. Groups and schools of awakening. Another aspect to keep in mind is that it is extremely difficult to achieve the awakening of the consciousness if the person is by himself. That is why, in the history of humanity, there have always been formed groups which have their master and his disciples, who gather in what is called initiatic schools, fourth way schools, schools of awakening, or however one wishes to call them, in order to join efforts and in that way have more chances of success. It has been demonstrated that each person who has awakened has always had his esoteric school and has also had his masters. And if one thinks this is not the case, it is enough to take a look to nothing more than the case of the initiate and greatest master who walked on this planet, Jesus the Christ, the Venerable Yeshua ben Pandira, Master of Masters, who belonged to the esoteric school, the Essenes, where he had his instructors and masters. If the greatest master of all who have taken a physical body in this planet passed through these experiences and through these methods, who are we to think that we do not need them and that we can achieve the awakening of the consciousness and the intimate self realization of the being by ourselves? To illustrate in a very clear and direct way the subject of alarm clocks, the group and the master or instructor who leads a group which wants to awaken, we will share some relative teachings of Master G, which were left for posterity thanks to the effort and memory of his disciple, the Master Ouspensky. How many times have I been asked here whether wars can be stopped? Certainly they can. For this, it is only necessary that people should awaken. It seems a small thing. It is, however, the most difficult thing there can be, because this sleep is induced and maintained by the whole of surrounding life, by all surrounding conditions. How can one awaken? How can one escape the sleep? These questions are the most important, the most vital that can ever confront a man. But before this, it is necessary to be convinced of the very fact of sleep. But it is possible to be convinced of this only by trying to awaken. When a man understands that he does not remember himself, and that to remember himself means to awaken to some extent, and when at the same time he sees by experience how difficult it is to remember himself, he will understand that he cannot awaken simply by having the desire to do so. It can be said still more precisely that a man cannot awaken by himself, but if, let us say, 20 people make an agreement that whoever of them awakens first shall wake the rest, they already have some chance. Even this, however, is insufficient because all the 20 can go to sleep at the same time and dream that they are waking up. Therefore, more still is necessary. They must be looked after by a man who is not asleep, or who does not fall asleep as easily as they do, or who goes to sleep consciously when this is possible, when it will do no harm either to himself or to others. They must find such a man and hire him to wake them, and not to allow them to fall asleep again. Without this, it is impossible to awaken. This is what must be understood. Only a man who fully realizes the difficulty of awakening can understand the necessity of long and hard work in order to awaken. Speaking in general, what is necessary to awake a sleeping man? A good shock is necessary. But when a man is fast asleep, one shock is not enough. A long period of continual shocks is needed. Consequently, there must be somebody to administer these shocks. I have said before that if a man wants to awaken, he must hire somebody who will keep on shaking him for a long time. But whom can he hire if everyone is asleep? A man will hire somebody to wake him up, but this one also falls asleep. What is the use of such a man? And a man who can really keep awake will probably refuse to waste his time in waking others up. He may have his own, much more important work to do. There is also the possibility of being awakened by mechanical means. A man may be awakened by an alarm clock, but the trouble is that a man gets accustomed to the alarm clock far too quickly. He ceases to hear it. Many alarm clocks are necessary, and always new ones. Otherwise, a man must surround himself with alarm clocks which will prevent him from sleeping. But here again there are certain difficulties. Alarm clocks must be wound up. In order to wind them up, one must remember about them. In order to remember, one must wake up often. But what is still worse, a man gets used to all alarm clocks, and after a certain time he only sleeps the better for them. Therefore, alarm clocks must be constantly changed. New ones must be continually invented. In the course of time, this may help a man to awaken. But there is very little chance of a man doing all the work of winding up, inventing, and changing clocks all by himself, without outside help. It is much more likely that he will begin this work, and that it will afterwards pass into sleep, and in sleep he will dream of inventing alarm clocks, of winding them up and changing them, and simply sleep all the sounder for it. Therefore, in order to awaken, a combination of efforts is needed. It is necessary that somebody should wake the man up. It is necessary that somebody should look after the man who wakes him. It is necessary to have alarm clocks, and it is also necessary continually to invent new alarm clocks. But in order to achieve all this and to obtain results, a certain number of people must work together. One man can do nothing. Before anything else, he needs help. But help cannot come to one man alone. Those who are able to help put a great value on their time. And, of course, they would prefer to help, say, 20 or 30 people who want to awaken rather than one man. Moreover, as has been said earlier, one man can easily deceive himself about his awakening and take for awakening simply a new dream. If several people decide to struggle together against sleep, they will wake each other. It may often happen that 20 of them will sleep, but the 21st will be awake and he will wake up the rest. It is exactly the same thing with alarm clocks. One man will invent one alarm clock, another man will invent another. Afterwards, they can make an exchange. Altogether, they can be of very great help one to another, and without this help no one can attain anything. Therefore, a man who wants to awake must look for other people who also want to awake, and work together with them. This, however, is easier said than done, because to start such work and to organize it requires a knowledge which an ordinary man cannot possess. The work must be organized, and it must have a leader. Only then can it produce the results expected of it. Without these conditions, no efforts can result in anything whatsoever. Men may torture themselves, but these tortures will not make them awake. This is the most difficult of all for certain people to understand. By themselves and on their own initiative, they may be capable of great efforts and great sacrifices. But because their first effort and their first sacrifice ought to be obedience, nothing on earth will induce them to obey another, and they do not want to reconcile themselves to the thought that all their efforts and all their sacrifices are useless. Work must be organized, and it can be organized only by a man who knows its problems and its aims, who knows its methods, by a man who has in his time passed through such an organized work himself. A man usually begins his studies in a small group. This group is generally connected with a whole series of similar groups on different levels, which, taken together, constitute what may be called a preparatory school. The first and most important feature of groups is the fact that groups are not constituted according to the wish and choice of their members, who selects types which, from the point of view of his aims, can be useful to one another. No work of groups is possible without a teacher. The work of groups with the wrong teacher can produce only negative results. The next important feature of group work is that groups may be connected with some aim of which those who are beginning work in them have no idea whatsoever and which cannot even be explained to them until they understand the essence and the principles of the work and the ideas connected with it. But this aim towards which without knowing it they are going, and which they are serving, is the necessary balancing principle in their own work. The first task is to understand this aim, that is, the aim of the teacher. When they have understood this aim, although at first not fully, their own work becomes more conscious and consequently can give better results. But, as I have already said, it often happens that the aim of the teacher cannot be explained at the beginning. Therefore, the first aim of a man beginning work in a group should be self-study. The work of self-study can be produced only in properly organized groups. One man alone cannot see himself, but when a certain number of people unite together for this purpose, they will even involuntarily help one another. It is a common characteristic of human nature that a man sees the fault of others more easily than he sees his own. At the same time, on the path of self-study, he learns that he himself possesses all the faults that he finds in others. But there are many things that he does not see in himself, whereas in other people he begins to see them. But, as I have just said, in this case, he knows that these features are his own. Thus, other members of the group serve him as a mirror in which he sees himself. But of course, in order to see himself in other people's faults, and not merely to see the faults of others, a man must be very much on his guard against and be very sincere with himself. The fundamental demands which have been enumerated provide the material for rules, which are obligatory for all members of a group. In the first place, rules help everyone who wants to work to avoid everything that may hinder him or do harm to his work. And secondly, they help him to remember himself. It very often happens that at the beginning of the work, the members of a group do not like some or others of the rules, and they even ask, can we not work without rules? Rules seem to them to be an unnecessary constraint of their freedom or a tiresome formality, and to be reminded about rules seems to them to be ill will or dissatisfaction on the part of the teacher. In reality, rules are the chief and the first help that they get from the work. It stands to reason that rules do not pursue the object of affording them amusement or satisfaction, or of making things more easy for them. Rules pursue a definite aim, to make them behave as they would behave if they were, that is, if they remembered themselves and realized how they ought to behave with regards to people outside the work, to people in the work, and to the teacher. If they remembered themselves and realized this, rules will not be necessary for them. But they are not able to remember themselves and understand this at the beginning of the work, so that rules are indispensable, although rules can never be either easy, pleasant, or comfortable. On the contrary, they ought to be difficult, unpleasant, and uncomfortable. Otherwise, they would not answer their purpose. Rules are the alarm clocks which wake the sleeping man. But the man, opening his eyes for a second, is indignant with the alarm clocks and asks, "Can one not awaken without alarm clocks?" It is highly probable that when reading the last part of this chapter, some people will think that this is not true and that it is possible to awaken alone, without participating in any esoteric school, and without a master or guide. But if that were so, I wonder, why does humanity not only remain asleep, but is each time even more asleep? Why are these people who think they can awaken by themselves, or without participating in an esoteric group, not awake? Why has the Gnostic people of the world, or all the people who have access to the teachings, in general, not awakened yet? He who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. Ask, and you shall be given.